Thank you, Judge, and thank you, Senator Ossoff. And so only in the Senate would we characterize a 5-minute round of questioning as a lightning round. But that's what we're going to shift to at this moment. And those senators who wish to ask a second question will have 5 minutes to do so. And I'm going to kick it off if I can. I want to address an issue which doesn't come up very often in this type of hearing, but should, and that is the state of America's federal prisons. We talk a lot about justice under the law, sentencing, enforcement. We know the outcome in many, many cases is that a person is incarcerated for sometimes a very lengthy period of time. How long that period of time is and how that person is treated in prison should be our concern as well. It's a reflection on our values as a nation, just as many other things are. So the first thing I would say is that I made a serious mistake, along with many others, including the current president, in supporting a bill more than 25 years ago, which established a standard for sentencing crack cocaine 100 to 1 compared to powder cocaine. The net result of it was a failure of policy. It did not reduce addiction. It did not raise the price of crack cocaine. Just the opposite occurred. We ended up arresting thousands of Americans and sentencing them to lengthy sentences, primarily African Americans. And so I introduced a bill several years ago, the Fair Sentencing Act, which was signed into law by President Obama. And then I worked with Senator Grassley, Senator Lee, who's here today, as well as Senator Booker and others to pass the First Step Act. The idea was to reconcile some of the injustice in our sentencing under that earlier law. President Trump, much to our surprise, signed it into law and even spoke positively about it at the State of the Union. Unfortunately, it has not been implemented, and the provisions in there to prepare people for release from prison as well as to reduce sentences have not been effectively enforced. So point number one, I hope you will put that on your agenda because I'll be back in touch with you to ask. Second point, the United States has 5% of the population of the world and 20% of the COVID infections and deaths. It's a terrible commentary on our failure to deal with this public health crisis. But to make matters even worse, the infection rate in federal prison populations is 4 times what it is in the surrounding community, and more than 230 federal prisoners have died. We need to have a sensible and humane response to compassionate release in this time of pandemic. Senator Grassley and I have introduced legislation along those lines, and I'm going to ask you to look at that carefully as well. And the third is, last item that I'll bring up for your response, was an article written several years ago in the New Yorker magazine, and I think I may have mentioned this to you, by Dr. Atul Gawande, who is a surgeon in the Boston metropolitan area, a prolific writer and a very insightful man. And he wrote an article about the impact of solitary confinement on the human mind, and went further to talk about how people in a perilous situation can be reduced to an inhuman level just by isolation, 23 hours a day sitting in the cell by yourself. It just has that impact. And I looked into it to see what was happening at the federal level. I'm happy to report to you that things are marginally better, but only marginally. I think that isolation is cruel and unusual, and has to be used in some circumstances for an extremely dangerous inmate, but unfortunately is used in too many circumstances now. Many states are way ahead of the federal prison system in looking at this issue. I only have a minute left, and it's all yours to react.
Well, these are all easy because I had already thought about all of them, and in each case, I think I will be looking at each one of these problems. The First Step Act, both with respect to our, if I'm confirmed, the First Step Act with respect to the reentry education that's required so that people don't become recidivists. They're able to go into societies. The First Step Act with respect to the coverage of the act for retroactive reduction in sentences. I also, over the years, maybe like you, I've learned more and more about the crack powder distinction and how, by reading the Sentencing Commission reports, about how there seems to be little, if any, support for making that. So I now am of the view that there is no reason, so I'm very interested in reform in that area. I have read but don't know a lot about the solitary confinement issue, but I can't imagine that. Obviously, it's required in some circumstances to protect people from other people, but it's not any kind of regular measure for incarceration. So all three of these areas are ones that I was already planning to look at, and I can assure you that I will.
Thanks, Judge. I see Senator Lee is here, and I'm going to recognize him next in the lightning round.